Hello, welcome to my channel Zero to Siva. If you have not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my channel. In this channel, I'll be discussing about Mulesoft starting from scratch and I'll make you advanced Mule developer. So this is a multi-week program. Week one, I started with week one where I'm discussing about prerequisites or basics. So in week one, I have already created two videos, which you have to see: XML basics and XSD, and then HTTP basics. Then now in this lecture, I'm going to discuss about basics of REST. You might have heard about REST, but what is it exactly? You are going to understand now in detail. REST stands for Representational State Transfer. Okay, let us see and understand with an example. Assume that this is a server machine, and on server, I am deploying one application. This application is using a database. Can I say, as this application is using a database, can I say that database is a resource to my application? Yes. Anything which my application uses is a resource to my application. So my application is using a database. Assume that in this database, I have a table of customers where I am storing my customer related data. And in this, I have lot of columns. Customer ID is a primary key. So as my application is using customers database table, this customers table also is a resource to my application. Okay. Now assume that in this application I have written a service. Suppose if I am developing an application in Java, assume that I have written a class called as customer service dot Java. I am just talking Java, but it can be a service in .NET or Python or anything. Assume that I am writing one service, customer service, and there are methods. One method, get all customers. The logic inside this method will fire a query on this customers table and return a list of customers. Get customer by ID. I have one more method which will take ID and return a customer. And there is one more method, add customer, which will take a customer object as input and return the added customer. Assume that these are the three methods. Now, what I want to do is I want to expose these methods on this service so that any client application should be able to access these methods and get the data, right? So what I can do is in my application I can write some other logic so that this methods can be exposed over HTTP protocol. Yes, by using HTTP we can expose some methods on this service. Let us not go to the implementation details. Let us talk about the concepts first. So what I can do is in my service, I can write some logic so that whenever a HTTP GET request comes to slash customers, I can write my application such that some logic will be executed whenever a GET request comes to slash customer, and it will invoke get all customers method and fire a query. This method will fire a query on the customers table, and this method is going to return list of customers. That means on my inside my application, there is a list of customer objects. Objects contain state. That means the customer information is a state, right? Objects contain state. Now, there is some state on the server side. Object is containing state. Now, this object data has to be transferred to the client in a language neutral representation. So, on server, I have state. I want to do state transfer. I want my service to do state transfer in a language neutral representation. So if I can write a service which can do state transfer in a language neutral representation, such a service, whatever I'm going to write on the server, we call it as a REST service. A service which supports state transfer using multiple representations. So on my server application, I have to develop one service which can do state transfer in a language neutral representation. That means whenever this method is invoked, this method is returning a Java list in this case, right? That list has to be converted to either XML format or maybe JSON format or maybe other formats like CSV, whatever format, and then return the response in language neutral representation. Okay. Now, if client wants the data in XML format, somehow the client should be able to tell to the server, hey, I want the data in XML format. How? In HTTP, whenever a client is making a request, there can be HTTP headers. One of the HTTP header is accept. The value is I can pass application slash XML. So if a client is passing this accept header with value application slash XML whenever it is making a GET request, okay, the server understands that the client is asking the data in XML format. So what this service will do is service will convert whatever objects it has on server side to XML format and return it. Okay. But if there is another client which wants the data in JSON format, that client will send a GET request to slash customers and accept header will be application slash JSON. Oh, the client is requesting for JSON. The same service which will take the request will understand, oh, now the client is requesting for same data in JSON format. It should have some logic to convert that object to JSON and send the response back to client in JSON format. So same service, it supports state transfer and in multiple representations. If you can develop a service which can do state transfer and if it supports multiple representations, we call such a service as a REST service or RESTful service. Okay. I hope now you are able to visualize what is REST. Any service which transfers state, which can support state transfer in multiple representations is called as a REST service. And in REST, what is the protocol which we use is HTTP only. Till date, there is no other protocol which is used in REST. HTTP is actually used as a protocol for making a request and giving the response. Okay. Now let us see some more basics about REST. Actually, REST It is an architectural style of exposing services. REST is not a language, or REST is not a framework. REST is just an architectural style of writing programs or exposing programs. Okay. According to REST, what it does is, on server, a server has multiple resources. Maybe a server will be using a database, and in database there might be a customer table, there might be some other table like orders table, order items table, etc. If you are writing an application for order management system, you might be maintaining customer data in customers table, orders data in orders table. One order can have multiple order items. There is separate table. So I can say each table is a resource to my application. So in REST, what we do is we expose resources. Our RESTful service will expose these resources so that any client can consume this. So basically, whenever you are exposing a customer resource, what all operations you might want to do? You might want to get all customers. So you might want to read the data, or you might want to add a customer. You might want to add a customer by making a request. That means you want to create a resource. You might want to update a customer by making a request. So you might want to update, or you might want to delete a customer. So basically, whatever we do in an application can be either classified into create or read or update or delete. So basically, in RESTful services, what we want is we want to expose resources such that the client should be able to perform CRUD operations, we say. Client should be able to create a resource or read a resource or update a resource or delete a resource. Right. So normally RESTful services expose resources so that clients can do CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete. Okay. Now, HTTP protocol is sufficient for performing CRUD operations, because if you want to read a resource, for example, I want to get all customers. So I can use get request, get method of HTTP slash customers will be the URL. So get request to slash customers will retrieve all customers. Suppose if you want to add a customer, what you can do? You can use post to slash customers. Suppose if you want to retrieve a customer, maybe by ID, of course, what you can do, get request to slash customers slash some ID. I'm writing it as a placeholder. Maybe slash customers slash 100 will retrieve a customer by ID 100. Okay. Now, I want to update a customer. If I want to update a customer, what I can do? I can make a put request to slash customers slash ID, which customer you want to update. And in the body of put, maybe I can send the data of customer either in XML format or in JSON format. Even when you are adding a customer for post request, you will send the customer data in the body of post either in XML format or JSON format. Okay. When a client is posting, the body can be either XML or JSON, right? Somehow, the client should be able to tell to the server, hey, I am posting JSON or I am posting XML. How does the client tell? There is a HTTP header called as content dash type. The value should be application slash JSON if you are sending JSON in body, or if you are sending XML in body, you have to specify the header called as content type as application slash XML. So like that, you can actually use get request for reading a resource, post HTTP request for adding a resource, put for updating, and similarly, if you want to delete a customer, you can use HTTP delete method and pass the URL customers slash ID. So basically, HTTP protocol itself can be used to perform CRUD operations. Actually, on the web, any operation on the web can be classified into create, read, update, delete. And HTTP has corresponding methods to do all these operations. So actually, as we know, HTTP is a transport protocol. That means we use HTTP to actually transport the data from client to server and server to client. Basically, HTTP is designed as a transport protocol, but here in this case, I'm using HTTP as my application protocol. To access my application, you can use the corresponding methods on HTTP and you can make requests. So for my application, there is a protocol. My application says, hey, whenever you want to retrieve some data or read some data, use get. Whenever you want to add a resource, use post, put, delete. So like that, this application protocol is telling you can use these HTTP methods. So basically in REST, we use HTTP as an application protocol. Okay, fine. Now you understood the basics of REST. Now let us try to understand some best practices on how you can design your RESTful service. Suppose if this is a server on which you are deploying your service, your RESTful service exposes resources, right? First rule in REST is every resource must have a unique identifier. Suppose if I have a customers table, how do I identify uh, this customers table uniquely? That is by using slash customers. Slash customers is a URI which represents my customers table. Every resource must be identified by a unique URI slash customers. Fine. We should always use plural whenever you are pointing to a resource, a URI. Customers, because there might be a lot of customers, right? So get request to slash customers will give you all customers. Fine. Now, how do you retrieve all customers belonging to some city? Assume that in my customer table, there is a column called as city. I want to retrieve all customers, but belonging to city, Bangalore. How do I make a such request? Normally, what we do is we pass query parameters. In URI, you can pass after URI, you can pass question mark. City is equals to Bangalore. So if you are sending a request like this, what does it mean? You want all customers. Slash customers represents all customers, but filter out based on city is equals to Bangalore. So server should return all the customers belonging to city Bangalore. Remember, whenever you are exposing service for slash customers, what if the client doesn't send this query parameter city? What is the meaning? Maybe the client wants all customers, right? So actually this query parameter may be optional. Normally query parameters are optional. So if you don't pass city, maybe on the server side it will assume that city can be anything, right? So if you want to pass some optional data whenever you are making a request, whenever a client is making a request, if client wants to send optional data, query parameters can be used, right? And there can be multiple query parameters. Maybe I want to send one more ampersand, country is equals to maybe India, right? So like that I can pass multiple query parameters, but remember that query parameters are optional. Fine. Now, how do we retrieve a customer by ID? Shall I design a service where it accepts request for slash customer slash ID? Suppose slash customer slash 100. What does this mean? I want to get a customer with ID 100. So can we design like this? It makes sense, right? Customer slash 100. It makes sense. Of course, I am designing the RESTful service. I can expose it whatever URL I want. But there are some standard guidelines which we need to follow. Always make sure that your URI starts with a plural. See, as you know, slash customers represents all customers. If you give slash customers slash 100, you have to read it like this. Among all customers, I want to narrow down and get one customer with ID 100. So slash customers represents a collection of resources, collection of customers. Among that collection, you are selecting a customer with ID. So you might have to expose a resource which can be accessible at slash customers slash ID. I'm giving a placeholder. This ID is actually a URI parameter. A parameter in the URI. This after question mark is request parameter. Okay. Now you might have a question. Hey, if I want a customer with ID, what I can do is maybe can I actually design my URI like this? Slash customers. That means it represents all customers, and I can pass question mark. ID is equals to 100. Is this not good? Does that mean that I want a customer with ID 100? Yes. Maybe if I am designing this server, a RESTful service, I could design like this also, where I can expect ID in the query parameter. But now the question might be, should I design this ID as a query parameter whenever I am designing my RESTful service? Or should I design ID as a URI parameter? What is better? So here is the answer. Remember, request parameters are optional. Okay. So if you are having some request parameter, the client may not pass the ID. So in that case, it will retrieve all customers, right? So if you are exposing some operation on the server, which needs ID, ID is mandatory. So if you want to retrieve a customer by ID, ID is mandatory, right? So if something is mandatory, design it as a URI parameter. So if your service is designed to accept requests at this URI, if somebody doesn't pass the ID, that is not uh, correct way to request, right? So that will be rejected. So design in such case, if you have some mandatory data which server is expecting, in case of getting a customer by ID, it is mandatory to pass ID. So for mandatory data, go with URI parameters. For optional data, you can go with query parameters. That's how you should design, right? So now, whenever a get request is made, if uh, in this case, if customer with ID, whatever you asked, is not there, 404 will be the status. But if customer with the ID, whatever you asked, is it there, then server will return 200 status code, and in the response there will be the customer data. Right? Now, coming to designing a post, if you want to expose a service where you want to allow to add a customer, how should you design your URI? See, slash customers represents all customers, right? You have to make a post to slash customers. And in the post body, you have to send the customer data as XML or JSON. Now you might ask me, hey, I can't I design my URI to be like slash customer? It also makes sense, right? But actually the rule, not a rule, guideline is make sure that your URIs are plural. Actually, you have to see this like this. Slash customers represents all customers, collection of customers, right? To that existing collection, you are posting one more customer. That is how you have to read it. So the URLs should start with plural, right? So slash customers will be the appropriate URI. See, again, this is not a rule. Suppose if you are designing your own REST API and if you say, hey, I'm designing my URI to be slash customer, that's okay. You are the owner. And if you are exposing like that, if I am your consumer, I have to make a post request to slash customer only. But there are some guidelines how we should design your URIs, because in the industry, anybody who is designing the URIs, if everybody is following the same rules, then anybody who is consuming, they will understand just by seeing the URI, they'll understand what is the intent of this URI. So follow these rules when designing. Hey, right now we are just understanding the concept. We will actually design REST APIs in Mule later, going on in the next stages. But just we are understanding the concepts. Okay. Now remember, whenever you are making a post request, how do you tell to the server that you are posting XML or JSON? As I told you, you have to send a request header called as content dash type. And if you are posting XML, the value must be application slash XML. If you are posting JSON, application slash JSON. That is how the server knows what type of content it can expect, XML or JSON. Fine. If you have made a post request to slash customers, the request went to server and server has added this customer data into its database. Normally on server side, the primary key, in this case customer ID, will be generated on the server side. Normally IDs are generated on the server side, right? So somehow whenever post is successful, actually server should send 201 as a status code. 201 stands for created. Whenever a resource is created successfully because of post, according to HTTP protocol, the status code must be 201 created. And response body might be optional. The server might choose to send the added customer details along with ID or not. But according to HTTP, if 201 is returned by server, server should somehow tell what should be the URI to access this newly created resource. Suppose whenever a customer is added, assume that the ID which got generated on server side is 101. Now tell me what will be the URI to access this customer with ID 101 slash customers slash 101. Right. So whenever server is returning success 201 as status code, there must be a response header called as location. And the response header value should be the URI to access this newly created resource. Again, these are guidelines. Whenever 201 is returned according to HTTP, you should be actually returning a header called as location, which contains the URI to access this newly created resource. Okay. So that's the basic about post. And coming to put, if you want to update a customer, you can make a put request to slash customers slash what customer you want to update ID. And in the put body, again, you can send the data. So server should accept this put request and then update the customer in the database table. So if updation is successful, then success, right? Now, again, the implementation of server, what it can do, it can send success status code 200, and in the response body, it can send the updated customer data. It can, but in my server implementation, I just wanted to send a response saying, hey, updation is successful. But in my implementation, I don't want to send response body. That is my implementation. So in such cases, I should not send 200. I should send 204. 204 stands for success only. But in the response, there will be no body, no response body. So these are the important status codes you should remember whenever you are whenever you are designing a put request. On the server side, the server must return 204 if server wants to return a success but no response body. If in server implementation, if you want to say, okay, updation is success, and you might want to return the updated data in the body, then in that case, 200 should be your status code. Similarly, if you want to delete, you can use delete request and send the customer ID. Again, if deletion is successful, then most probably we just wanted a success message. So again, if you just wanted to say that delete is successful with no response body, 204 can be the status code. You just want to send 204 status code, no body. But after deleting, maybe you want to send a response body with a message saying that customer is deleted successfully. You want to send this message. Then in that case, maybe 200 will be appropriate. So like that, in REST APIs, what you do is you design your REST API using URIs. And while you are implementing, you have to write your logic such that your implementation accepts get request, put request, post request, etc. So the client will make HTTP requests and invoke some logic on your service, right? That is actually RESTful web services. So we will be implementing later in Mule, but I hope this has prepared you with basics of what is REST, what are the underlying concepts in REST. You understood that HTTP is the application protocol which we use in REST, right? And various HTTP methods. So that basics should be sufficient to get you started with REST. That's all. In my next lecture, we are going to understand about SOAP web services. So maybe you can continue to watch the next lecture on SOAP web services. See you next lecture. Thank you.